What's up, hockey fans? Hockey is in the air. Quite literally, yes, the calendar has turned to September, but you wake up in the morning and the air is crisp. It's cool. Hockey is right around the corner. We are just a couple weeks away from training camps opening around the National Hockey League, followed in close proximity to NHL preseason action. And yes, the regular season is just over 1 month away. Buckle up. Welcome into the latest edition of the BR NHL Insider Notebook. I'm your host, Frank Seravalli, and I'll be answering your questions and comments from around the NHL as we get you up to date on all the latest news and information from around the hockey world. And let's start with perhaps the biggest story in the sport, one that could become a big story across multiple sports. And that is an NHL Mount Rushmore player of all time, by the way, in Connor McDavid. Yes, he'd be on my top 4 greatest hockey players of all time, even without a Stanley Cup to his credit. He's about to enter or potentially enter the last season of his contract with the Edmonton Oilers without an extension in place. What does it all mean? What's happening? Should Edmonton Oilers fans be nervous? And I'm not playing up the hype here. It's just really interesting that the calendar has now turned to September, a couple weeks away from training camp opening, and McDavid doesn't have a deal. So what happened over the last week? Let's catch you up. Well, Team Canada held their Olympic orientation camp in Calgary. Connor McDavid took the podium, and not shockingly, one of the first questions, if not the first question from reporters, was about that contract situation with the Edmonton Oilers. And his response was really kind of telling here. Let's take a look at Connor McDavid's quote, or one of them, from his media availability in Calgary late last week. And he said, like I said at the end of June, I had every intention just to take my time with it, and I still feel the same way. Take my time and go through everything. I have every intention to win in Edmonton. It's my only focus, maybe next to winning the gold medal with Canada, but it is my intention to win there, ... We're going through it slowly. Yes, emphasis on slowly. So what can we glean from that? What do we understand as the priority for Connor McDavid? Well, yes, he wants to win, and yes, he wants to win in Edmonton. But I viewed these comments as sort of the first public commentary from McDavid on this subject since the end of last season and Edmonton Oilers breakup day following their loss in the Stanley Cup final, sort of as a trial balloon. How does the Edmonton market respond to hearing comments like this without a new deal being in place? And so far, I haven't really heard any panic. So what I can glean from that, and not to say that things can't change, but my understanding would be that I don't think we're going to see Connor McDavid sign a new contract extension before the opening of training camp around September 15th. It could change. Connor McDavid's head could plop off the pillow on Wednesday morning and he says, enough, uncle, I want to do this. Let's get it done. And that's about how quickly it'll get done. I think the Edmonton Oilers as a whole are a little bit flummoxed as to why this has kind of taken so long. There hasn't really been too much engagement. They haven't talked numbers or anything like that in terms of advancing the conversation forward. And I think the harder part for me is trying to wrap my head around what might change in order to make that happen. It's probably not any sort of artificial deadline. A date is just a date. There's no real reason to rush. McDavid has mentioned that he wants to play it slowly. But beyond that, I think Connor McDavid is, to the best of my understanding, thinking long-term here. Yes, having gone to 2 straight Stanley Cup finals, getting as close as any team could without winning a Stanley Cup, the Edmonton Oilers are ready to roll this year. They're ready to have another shot, particularly with an injection of youth from Matt Savoy and Ike Howard into their lineup. But what's the next iteration? And we talked a little bit about that on last week's NHL Insider Notebook here on the BR app, as well as streaming on YouTube, about that idea of what do the future iterations of the Edmonton Oilers look like. He wants to have the best long-term chance to win. And you could argue that with a bit of an aging core to this Edmonton team, that maybe that in Edmonton isn't the spot. So he's going to go through this discernment process, and maybe on the other end of it, he signs a 3 or a 4-year deal, or maybe he gets to the end of this upcoming season and says, hey, we just got to another cup final, or we just won the Stanley Cup, or whatever it might be. I think the best chance to win long-term is still with this core, with the only other place on planet Earth that I could play with Leon Draisaitl. I want to do it in Edmonton, and maybe I'm actually going to sign for 8 years. So there's this push and pull, but I think the interesting part is there's nothing that Edmonton can show on their own end unless Ike Howard and Matt Savoy are cemented in the top six or perhaps even middle six this season and have monster years that are probably going to put some of those concerns, question marks, or fears at bay for Connor McDavid to answer and get to the root of some of those questions. So really interesting situation developing in Edmonton, certainly one that we're going to continue to watch. And as mentioned, this is not just a huge story in the NHL after a really quiet summer, but when you have a player of this magnitude potentially getting to free agency or getting inching closer to it, there's going to be a bigger story across the all four major sports here in the United States. It's going to become a cross-border story. Let's see how loud the temperature, let's see how loud the conversation and noise gets in Edmonton before we start to handicap that a little bit more. As mentioned, still tons and tons of time. And I don't think there's a window opening that says, hey, Connor McDavid isn't going to sign there. I just think that there's a little bit of a pause at the moment to try and figure out exactly what he wants and how he wants to do it. And whenever he decides that he wants to make it happen, well, then I think the Oilers are pretty well prepared to make it move quickly. He's going to write down a number on a sheet of paper, and they're going to say yes, and that's going to be the end of that conversation. What do you think? Throw your chats, your comments, your questions, your concerns. Are you an Edmonton Oiler fan? How are you feeling about the Connor McDavid contract situation? Put it in our chat. I want to hear from you. I want to understand what you're thinking and feeling as well. Speaking of that chat, let's take a look what's going on here on the BR app as well as streaming on YouTube. DJ wants to know, is JVR, James Van Riemsdyk, the Detroit Red Wings top line left winger? I'm going to say maybe. I think the door might be open in terms of fit. The thing that I love about James Van Riemsdyk's game is that it hasn't changed. He's probably been the same exact player in the NHL for the last 12, 13, 15 years, whatever that number is. He's never been a burner, but he's one of the great net front players. You could say maybe has slowed down a touch. I'm not buying it, but has a willingness to make things happen in front of the net, and his puck retrieval and every other thing that's a big facet of his game has been hugely impressive. So I think, another 14, 15 goal, 16 goal season with the Columbus Blue Jackets last year, you could probably pencil him in for at least that in Detroit as the Red Wings try and take a step forward here and become a team that accomplishes what the Montreal Canadiens did last year, which is break through and get into the playoffs. Jason wants to know, this is about Connor McDavid. He is great. I don't see him signing an extension if it's not done before day one of the season. I mean, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, Jason, because I don't have a crystal ball, but I kind of have some of those similar vibes myself. If you're not signing before October 7th, call it the opening of the regular season, what's the impetus? What's the push to sign? I mean, at that point, you could kind of wait until, June, May to figure it out. Once your season's over, take some time to digest everything and understand the full process of where things are heading with the Edmonton Oilers. I can understand why the Oilers front office would want to get this done as soon as possible, and I'm sure that they're antsy to do so. But if you're McDavid, once the start of the season goes by, what's the pull? Unless it becomes so, over the top, the noise, or if it's impacting your team, which I think if it's impacting the team and the noise around it, then maybe that's not the right team. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm with you, Jason, and I fully understand what the Oilers might be feeling in this exact moment in time. James Gordon says, McDavid will be moving on. Simple as that. I don't think anything's simple in this case. I think he's got a deep connection to Edmonton. I think he's got a deep connection to Leon Draisaitl, and I think he wants to see this through. I think the question is, seeing it through now and for the short term, that's easy to do. It's what do 7 years from now, what do those projections look like? Those are the questions, unfortunately, that I don't think anyone can really answer. Eric Martin wants to know, you think the Leafs are not looking for top six, but instead looking for a top defenseman? I don't know. It feels like Brad Treliving has kind of always been looking for a bit of everything. That's sort of the MO of his tenure, not just in Toronto, but also in Calgary. I think their D actually last season was probably as good as it's been in a while. A team best prepared to compete in the playoffs that we've seen from this Toronto lineup in the last handful of years. I think the bigger question is, as they've sprinkled some more depth around and lost some high-end talent in Mitch Marner, how does that all balance out? I would think that they probably could use another sort of top six forward, but I kind of like the way that they're situated on defense. I like the mix, and I like the sort of different styles that they have, because they've got some guys that certainly bring that grit and defensive ability in front, blocking shots that I think is ultimately really needed to win at the time of year when it matters most. Bobby Bow wants to know, will Lucic make the Blues roster? It's been a while since we've seen Milan Lucic. It's almost an impossible question to answer. Be curious to see what kind of shape he's in, how well he's moving. Obviously, a really talented player that, for a big chunk of time was one of the dominant power forwards in the game, but had slowed down pretty considerably, and then taking a player out of the mix for that period of time after dealing with the allegations of domestic assault and the suspension that followed, I would say that, or voluntary suspension, I would say that it's hard to say or predict what we see from Milan Lucic. I got to see him on the ice and get eyes on him before I can give you a prediction on whether or not he'll make the Blues roster. But obviously some kind of connection, of course, going back with Jim Montgomery as well, that would probably point him in the right direction. So I mentioned before, I think the best guy who has a shot on a tryout agreement heading into camp would be Connor Sherry with the New York Rangers and his old coach, Mike Sullivan, from his time with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So we mentioned Team Canada Olympic Orientation Camp that kicked off last week in Calgary. And just a reminder, as we take a peek at some of the names who were invited to Team Canada Olympic Orientation Camp last week, is that this isn't necessarily an exhaustive list. A player could come out of the woodwork theoretically and make this team this upcoming season without having been invited to the orientation camp. It's not a prerequisite to be on this list in order to make Team Canada. Just want to put that out there because I think it's an important procedural note. But as you take a look at this list and you take a look at some of the players that did not make the Four Nations face-off group, who can find their way onto this team? The biggest one that stands out for me is Macklin Celebrini of the San Jose Sharks. I think he's in for a dynamic sophomore season. I think he is soon to take the torch as one of the most complete players in the league with high offensive upside. I love the way that he hit the ground running, and I thought we would have been talking about a much more special rookie season last year if he didn't run into some of that injury trouble as well. So my money would be on Macklin Celebrini to be a guy that could bridge that gap, and I know it's an incredibly tall task to make and crack this Team Canada Olympic roster, but man, it would be fun to see it, and the future is bright for the San Jose Sharks. There is zero doubt about that. And I think the other guy where there was probably some recency bias in not making last year's Team Canada roster for Four Nations was Zach Hyman. Got off to a bit of a slow start last season, obviously finished the season really well, and the Oilers clearly missed him when it came to the Stanley Cup final. It was tough not having him. Love to see Zach Hyman crack that roster. I just think as the best forechecker and premier press player in the league, he's a guy that stands out for me as something that Canada was missing, although obviously hard to nitpick at this roster for a team that did win Four Nations gold. So clearly they are obviously doing something right, which is why I love the commentary from Coach John Cooper at Team Canada Olympic Orientation Camp last week saying, hey, did Ferrari put out their first car and say, hey, we don't need to make this any better? Of course, you're always trying to fine-tune it, make improvements, and that's what I love about where you're looking at this roster going, hey, we're in a good spot here, but could we maybe get a little bit better if we add this? Maybe we want to add a Tom Wilson or someone that brings just a little bit of a different element. The Olympics are a touch different tournament than the Four Nations, and it's going to be really exciting to see what Team Canada cooks up with Coach John Cooper. Let's take a peek back at our chat. Bobby also wants to know, any concern about watering down the league with all this expansion? Why is no one talking about that? I think it's been brought up a couple times, Bobby, about the idea of, hey, if we jump from 32 teams to 34, you're injecting 50 new players into the league. Does that water down the league at all? My personal opinion is no. I think NHL talent and talent in successive lower leagues is better than it's ever been. And I think the sport is really well positioned to take a step forward in that regard. And I just think it's too much to pass up. It's not just the idea of adding, a few 100,000 more fans to your league. It's the incremental revenue. It's the incremental franchise fees. It's the incremental eyeballs in TV markets. It's getting more and more people involved with the game, which I think as you're trying to continually spread that gospel across the country, that's part of the push. That's more of what you need. Benji666 wants to know, what moves do you see Florida making once Tkachuk comes off of LTIR? That's Matthew Tkachuk. If you missed last week's stream or hadn't heard the news, he's going to miss the first 2 to 3 months of the season after undergoing surgery to have a torn adductor muscle repaired along with sports hernia surgery. I think the one name that everyone had circled, if the Panthers have cap trouble, maybe Evan Rodriguez is a guy that stands out as someone that they could move. I think that he would probably be the most likely candidate, but the answer and response that teams got when they had called the Florida Panthers about someone like Rodriguez just in the aftermath of winning the cup and getting all these guys signed to new deals was that they really weren't interested in moving him. So perhaps they had known then that they were going to be fine from a cap position. Man, it's going to be interesting to see because there's not really a lot extra money to go around in Florida. You could potentially buy, I don't know, maybe a team steak dinner with the cap space that they have remaining on this season's cap once everyone is healthy. Certainly a situation, as Benji points out, to continue to monitor. What's next for the Preds and UC Saros? Do they make a move with him this season, or is he the guy? I mean, he has to be the guy, right? They traded away Yaroslav Askarov, and I would think that just kind of the beginning stages of that massive deal, that Saros has to be Nashville's guy for the foreseeable future. And I think it's maybe a fair question to ask about what is the future of Roman Josi as he comes back from a pretty significant injury as well. Man, that would be interesting. James says, I hear Zary and the Flames are closer to a 3-year deal. What are you hearing? Haven't heard much on the Connor Zary case as an RFA with the Calgary Flames. There's a few pending RFAs that are interesting to watch as they do not have deals leading into training camp. Mason McTavish is one, and I did see a question in the chat about that. I think that one has been at a bit of a standstill. I think there's probably going to be a last push in the days leading up to camp, as there always is, to try and get him there to make sure that he doesn't miss time. But just as a refresher, it's Zary, Luke Hughes in New Jersey, which is a massive one. 2 seasons under his belt at the NHL level, 40-plus points, 44-plus points in both of those years, and north of 21 minutes a night in both of those years as well. That is a pretty significant new deal for the New Jersey Devils. And then the question is, how does it all fit? If you're paying Dougie Hamilton $9.25 or $9.5, man, it becomes really expensive to fit in everyone else. If you're going on a sizable term deal with Luke Hughes, it's going to be pretty expensive. So Hughes, Zary, McTavish, and then Wyatt Kaiser was a guy that we touched on last Tuesday as well with the Chicago Blackhawks. They have a bunch of defensemen, probably a roadmap there after getting a Louis Crevier deal done earlier this summer. That was at $900,000. Does Kaiser come in at 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, somewhere in that range? Call it a day. Get him in camp on time. I would think that for a guy with some upside and bright future, that you wouldn't want to be missing any time with the Chicago Blackhawks in camp trying to lock down one of those spots. I like Kaiser and Nolan Allen moving forward on the back end as an ideal NHL third pair, but Del Mastro and a few other guys, they're going to have a lot to say about that as well. If McDavid doesn't sign the extension before October, do you think the Oilers will start talks with other teams and seeing what they could get? Absolutely not. It's Connor McDavid. You don't trade him. You don't trade him unless you've exhausted every opportunity possible, but that would be after this upcoming season when you have a chance to win a Stanley Cup. John is a Caps fan. He wants to know, any chance McDavid replaces Ovi next season, meaning the following one in Washington? I don't think so. I think if Connor McDavid's going to be on the move, it's going to be on to a marquee market and team. Not that Washington isn't one, but think New York Rangers, Toronto, LA Kings, Chicago Blackhawks, Original Six, pick your spot, begin to conjure up your imagination. I think there's a way to do that, sort of like Wayne Gretzky being on the move as well. Let's move on to speaking of some RFAs that were unsigned. We talked about Connor McDavid. Now, this next question remains of two other high-profile guys with 1 year remaining on their deal, and that is Kirill Kaprizov from the Minnesota Wild and Jack Eichel from the Vegas Golden Knights. Who signs first? Will they both sign their extensions before the start of the regular season? I'm going to say yes to that. I'm going to say they both do sign, but I'm going to say that Jack Eichel signs first. I think... Look, I'm just ballparking these deals and sort of what they look like to me on paper. I see Jack Eichel in the $13 to $13.5 million range. I see Kirill Kaprizov having even more leverage. I see Kirill Kaprizov in the $15 million a year range. So we're talking big money tickets, and we're talking hugely critical guys to each of their team's success, and definitely with an emphasis on Kirill Kaprizov and the Minnesota Wild on that front. I don't know how the Wild chart their path forward offensively and putting the puck in the net if they don't have Kirill Kaprizov in the fold. And I think they realize that, just about wrapping their head around it. And a very unique second contract that he got, sort of unprecedented, but certainly worth it and has lived up to the hype, although maybe lacking some consistency as he's ran into some injuries over the course of the last couple seasons. So we talked about some UFAs, RFAs. We talked about Connor McDavid. We talked about Team Canada and their orientation camp. And as mentioned, Team USA held their orientation camp last week in Plymouth, Michigan. And, you take a look at this USA roster. I love that they're willing to go back to the drawing board here. So close to winning their first best on best title since the 1980 Miracle on Ice. I guess that would be Olympics, but 1996 World Cup of Hockey. So it's been a while. And this next generation of American players was bound to step up and make something special happen. But take a look at this from Team USA General Manager Bill Guerin, who said, the guys that played in Four Nations did a great job, but we have to go back to the drawing board and start over again. Guys have to be playing well. They've got to be healthy. So it's really tough to say how much is the roster going to change. I don't know. We will see as time goes on, but having the 2 extra spots is huge. He's talking about the roster spots. There'll be 25 players heading to the Olympics in Milan, Italy. There were 23 players maximum selected for Four Nations face-off, as that happened in the middle of the NHL regular season. They wanted to give some guys some time to go to the beach as opposed to being a healthy scratch in Montreal or Boston and enjoy some vacation time with their family as opposed to being locked in as an extra for the Four Nations. A little bit of a different feel to be part of the Olympics and be part of the Olympic Village and have a chance to win a gold or silver medal, or win any type of medal for that matter if you're Team USA. So I love their willingness here. I've mentioned before, I think there's definitely some openings. I think Adam Fox on the blue line has probably cracked the door open for a change there. I don't know that he was necessarily utilized and played the way that they wanted him to play. I think there's certainly some spots open at the bottom of the lineup. And we just talked about Matthew Tkachuk and how he put his body on the line for Team USA at the Four Nations, didn't play again in the regular season for the Florida Panthers as a result of that torn adductor muscle in that Four Nations faceoff. But I'd be curious to see how his body responds following surgery. 2 to 3 month timeline. We're talking November, December return. Olympics are in February. Obviously, being one of the first 6 players selected, he's on the team. But is there a door that gets cracked open if he's not back up to speed or if he's not able to regain full health? Just a situation that bears in mind, worth watching. That is for sure. Remdog says, is Mason McTavish staying in Anaheim? Yeah, I mean, they hold his rights. I would think that he is. It's always been a grind for Pat Verbeek and his RFAs. He wants to make them sort of earn that third contract, so to speak. And you look back at the recent past history from Zegras to Drysdale, those negotiations took a while, and they were willing to burn days in training camp in order to get the number that they saw fit. And so I would think that he's staying. I think that ultimately I have personally held this opinion that I believe he's a guy that could potentially be up for a change of scenery. I think it's been a tough few years for a bunch of Anaheim Duck players, but he's taken a huge step forward. I see Mason McTavish very much in the same way, with potential of Ryan O'Reilly back, 10 years ago. And I think that potential is largely untapped. Who's going to be able to draw that out of him with the help of a better roster, but also potentially Joel Quenneville taking over as head coach? I'm curious to see how just the general aura and vibe changes around that Ducks team, because I think it's been at times a pretty dark place over the past couple of years. Dr. J Combat says, are the Red Wings looking to make more moves? What is Steve Yzerman's job status if they miss the playoffs? Well, I think, to be frank, it has to be in question if they do miss the playoffs. I believe this season is year 8 of the Yzer plan. If my math is correct, it has been a while, and they have yet to see the type of success or sustained success that they'd be looking for. And it has been going on and on and on with some of the same outstanding issues, including significantly improving this team's defense, which I would argue has not happened so far this summer and this offseason. Who's my early pick for Rookie of the Year? I don't know. I'm not ready to answer that yet, Bobby. I got to think on that a little bit. Chris Jazz wants to know anything on Carey Price's contract being traded. Why could that be significant? Great question. I think that there's a door open for the Montreal Canadiens to move it. There's only so few teams that would actually want to acquire it. The benefit would be if you're a team that's already operating in LTIR space, you can continue to work that around. Most teams don't want to be in LTIR, and that would be the motivation for the Canadiens after paying that signing bonus yesterday, $5.5 million, would be to get out from under LTIR and not have to operate in that during the regular season. We'll see if anyone steps up and trades for it. I think it's probably a bit of a long shot, but I know that the Canadiens are opening to do it. Do you think the Oilers not having a different goaltending tandem is a reasoning for the lack of McDavid contract extension so far? That's from Stealth Legends. I'd say probably not. I don't think this is about this year. I think this is about the longer term, and Connor McDavid wants to know if he's putting pen to paper, whether it's for 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, 8 years, whatever it might be, that he wants to know that Edmonton will continue to be a place where he has a chance to win, not just this upcoming season. So I think that'll do it for today's edition of the NHL Insider Notebook here on the BR app. So great to hang with you and talk some puck. We're getting close, a couple weeks away from the opening of training camp. And yeah, want to know how close we are? Well, the NHL general managers and head coaches are convening in Detroit today and tomorrow for their annual kickoff meetings to start the season. So yeah, we're that close. Hang in there, hockey fans. Puck is on the way. Thanks a lot for joining us today on the NHL Insider Notebook here on the BR app, as well as those who threw their comments, questions, and concerns in the chat. It was great to hang with you, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday at 1:30 Eastern.